Hi, I'm Rick Potts, and I direct the Human Origins program at the Smithsonian National Museum of Natural History. I am a paleoanthropologist engaged in field research and studies of human evolution in Kenya and China. Our program supports researchers in many other countries of the world. It's an international endeavor. I'm also the curator of the permanent exhibit exploring human origins, what does it mean to be human, at the Smithsonian Natural History Museum, and also of the traveling version of this exhibit, which is right now situated here at St. Paul School of Theology. The purpose of the exhibit is to present scientific findings that relate to research into human origins. These are findings that come from the study, recovery and study of fossils and archaeological remains, of genetics, the genomes of not only human beings, but also of we're now starting to find ancient DNA in fossilized bones. The reasoning behind the exhibit is to develop a conversation across the country, visiting public libraries, but also seminaries, including the School of Theology, in order to nurture with the help of the local communities, a sense of conversation and respectful and civil and open discussion of the subject of human origins. Now, at the same time, it's well known that scientific discoveries about a human evolutionary history can be troubling to many individuals as well as communities, especially in a theological context. And so one of the things that I think is important to realize is that this sense of conflict between science and religion, as perceived by some communities, comes with or arises from a number of devastating assumptions. One of those assumptions is that people of deep religious commitment do not accept anything about science. Well, in my experience, that is certainly an incorrect assumption. The other assumption is that scientists reject theological and religious beliefs and are not people of faith. That also is an incorrect assumption. In my experience, not only in speaking with scientists around the world, but also as we go across the country with this exhibit, speaking with a whole variety of communities. And so with this in mind, we ask a question in this exhibit. The theme of the exhibit is not an answer. It's not as any kind of scientific answer, but rather is a question, a very profound one. What does it mean to be human? And that is a question that is broader than what science can study. It is a question that's informed by religious faith, by philosophy, by the literature and other arts. It's informed by the ethics that we learn while growing up, everyday experiences as well. And so what we do with this question is to try to listen and learn what are the starting points of people who come into this exhibit. What do they think? What do they believe? What is their understanding of their own humanness? And then we invite people to try to examine the scientific evidence and see where scientific discoveries, new ideas about the history of life on Earth with human beings as a part of it, how that might fit in and be compatible with their beliefs about their own humanness. And so with this in mind, we're going to take a little tour of the exhibit, visiting several of the panels in the exhibit. And we're going to start with the panel that's right here behind me, which is an introductory panel, or it could be the concluding panel. But you can see where people have taken very seriously here, the students and faculty and staff at St. Paul School of Theology have taken very seriously this idea that we want to know what people think about the question, what does it mean to be human? Please tell us what you think. And so an enormous range of wonderful, wonderful answers, the ability to choose. Let me just read a few of these. caring for others and being able to reason, just grateful. That's part of what being human is: love, adaptation, community, compassion, a whole variety of ones. There are Bible verses here. To be created in the image of God, and a whole variety of other answers. God can fit in, the ability to adapt. And so some of these answers are based on what people have come into the exhibit thinking. And some of the answers are ones where people, perhaps looking at some of the panels here, have also thought about in response to the exhibit. Let's then visit a few other panels here. And this is one where we can see some of the milestones in human evolutionary history. The goal of the exhibit, it really is to present major benchmarks or milestones in human evolutionary history over the course of geological time. When do we see the earliest evidence for some of the traits that distinguish human beings from all other living creatures on the planet? And so we see here a timeline from 10 million years ago to today. Beginning about 6 million years ago, we see early evidence in the fossil record of walking on two legs, walking with an upright body. We do not see that beforehand, but we do see it starting around 6 million years. The making of tools and eating meat from large animals. We've now actually, some of our own research at the Smithsonian working in Kenya has pushed this date a little bit further back, closer to 3 million years ago, but it was later in time than walking upright. Having longer legs of the skeleton, we can tell this traveling to new regions. We can see this from the dispersal of stone artifacts, the clues from stone tools that early humans were there in different parts of the world. And we begin to see this between 2 million and 1.8 million years ago, the first major dispersal beyond the African continent, where all of these earlier changes took place. Matters of the control of fire, the rapid increase in brain size as we get closer to the present, communicating with symbols, longer childhood, plant and animal domestication occurring very, very late in the whole scheme of things, and humans building cities is even later in time. We pose this against this broader temperature curve, this curve that's based on studies by environmental scientists looking at the chemistry of tiny microorganisms that come from deep ocean cores that basically are at temperature. It's a thermometer. It basically tells us the temperature on Earth overall and the amount of global ice on the globe, starting with especially in the ice age right around here. But you can see this oscillation. And what this shows basically is that Earth's temperature, the fluctuations between warm and cool, and also in the equatorial areas, the low latitudes of the globe, the fluctuations between very wet and very dry, drought conditions, have increased. Those fluctuations have increased over time and posing some of the major challenges to survival in early human evolution. And what we see here actually in the very end of this temperature curve is that this fluctuation upward is due to a time when humans are adding to the temperature issues and challenges of the planet. And this is a projection of where we are right around now, or very, very soon. And it's warmer, since this is warm and this is cold, it's warmer than any time since our own species has been on the planet, and even warmer since about 3 to 4 million years before the present. So the matter of adaptability and the challenges of human origins, I think, will continue in this way into the future. Over here, we see another panel that is about how we are related to all other living things. And we have here in the middle, just looking at human genetics, genetic variation, that all modern humans are genetically very similar. Only about a 0.1 genetic difference among all of the peoples across the planet. And so despite all of the outward diversity inside our cells, inside with our genes and our genomes, that we are all very, very similar, extremely similar to one another, indicating a pretty recent origin to our species, Homo sapiens. And then it shows the variety of genetic similarities to other organisms. Humans join onto the tree of life with the group called the primates. We are primates, and our closest living genetic relatives are chimpanzees and also bonobos related to chimpanzees, and others of the living great apes. But we were not evolved from any living chimpanzee or ape, but rather we share common ancestors back through time. So the two major ingredients about evolution is that we are part of a whole history of life that has been changing from the outset of life on Earth, and that there is a grand kinship to all organisms, a connectedness of all organisms that both in the present as well as in the past. And they are joined together, we are joined together with other organisms by sharing a series of common ancestors back through time. And so we can see within the primates, the tree of relationships that occur here. And we are very close, of course, to the primates, genetically a little bit more different from all other mammals. And we've represented that with mice, and with all other vertebrates. We've represented that with birds, with chickens. And we even share an amazing, surprising number of genetic similarities with all plants, which we have exemplified with the genome that's understood from banana trees. 60% genetically similar, what does that mean? That's incredible. Well, when you consider that the first 3 billion life on Earth, the first 3 billion years of life on Earth was cellular life. Everything, every organism that has a cell shares the same kind of genetic machinery, if you will, the same physiological functions and the operations of the cell. And so we share that great degree of genetic similarity due to being organisms, all of these organisms that have cells, reflecting that ancient and early part of the history of life. So why don't we go over here for a moment, and we can see here the array of early human species represented by these variety of circles. This is in 6 million years. That represents a graphic of the variety of species, or many of the species that scientists recognize as part of our unique evolutionary tree, our family tree, if you will. And they're joined together in 4 different groups here, with our part of the Homo species, as we are Homo sapiens. And I think one of the most important and interesting things here is not only did each of these species have different adaptations and ways of life, but they all share some combination of the features that characterize our own species, even from the outset, walking upright on 2 legs, males and females in the same groups, had small canine teeth, eye teeth, which is different from all the other primates. And then there are a variety of other sorts of changes that are added through time, the accumulation of features that define our species as unique from all other living organisms. But the thing that's so interesting to me here is that out of all this diversity of species, all this diversity of ways of life, we are the last ones left. That we are what I call the last biped standing, last 2-legged creature standing. And all of these other ways of life and species and lineages have become extinct. And I think this is a very profound thing to think about, to contemplate. It certainly underlines the fragility of life and the history of life on the planet, including in our own immense journey through time. What we also see in this diagram is that our evolutionary history is not a linear progress through time. That way of representing evolution is mistaken. We've known that's not the case for almost nearly a century, certainly over the last 70 years of research. Scientists have thrown out the concept of a linear change through time from ape-like to humans, but rather our evolutionary tree is diverse and branching, like the evolutionary histories of almost all other organisms that have been documented. So why don't we then go over here and talk a little bit more about how long some of these species were on the planet. And you may have also realized that when we talk about 6 million years, that we're talking about great depths of time. And how do we possibly know the immense depths of time that we're talking about here? Well, on the bottom of this panel, it's a very, very short presentation, but it gives some ideas about how scientists know from the study of a variety of chemistry, chemical systems, and physical systems, that there are something like about 14 to 15 different dating methods, techniques that have been developed by scientists, by geologists, to date often the sediments in which fossils and stone tools are buried, or sometimes even the fossils and the fossilized bones and fossilized teeth themselves. And so these particular dating techniques measure radioactive decay from one chemical element into another, which occurs in a clock-like way statistically. There's the possibility of counting electrons that are trapped in fossils and in rocks, and that is a time-dependent process. It's possible to compare magnetic particles in the sediments in which finds are found with shifts in Earth's magnetic field, which has flipped back and forth. The magnetic field has flipped back and forth over the eons, and these can be compared, the directions of magnetic particles in the sediments in the field with shifts in well-dated shifts in Earth's magnetic field. And of course, there is now the possibility of computing genetic changes back through time, the rate of genetic changes. And that also helps us understand the age of some of these species separations. In this particular chart here, we can then see then our own species, again, a 6 million year timeline here. Our own species is really coming in quite late in the whole picture here. The earliest fossil skulls that look like us anatomically, along with archaeological evidence of behaviors that look like us, they're familiar to us, the kinds of behaviors, starting at around 300,000 years ago, 300,000 years ago. But you can see that our species has been around for a relatively short period of time compared with some of them, like our ancestor, Homo erectus, which even after Homo sapiens evolved, Homo erectus also continued on in a small part of the world in Southeast Asia. We also overlapped in time with Homo heidelbergensis, Homo neanderthalensis, the famed Neanderthals, and a variety of other species. And yet, over the last 300,000 years, a number of these species have become extinct. We don't have evidence that our species was necessarily responsible for that, but this is a matter about the changes in environment, changes in the resources and shelters and water that could be found. And it turns out that our species is quite an adaptable species in response to all those fluctuations in environment. But you can see the relative amounts of time that each of these bars represent that these species, as far as we know now, have been in existence. Okay, well, so let's proceed over here. The whole idea, again, of the exhibit is to present a variety of milestones in our evolutionary history. It's organized, the exhibit is organized according to the emergence of upright walking and the various steps along the way, so to speak, in the development of our skeletons in terms of walking on two legs, new tools and new foods, the changes in technology that have occurred over time with a more diverse and small mobile toolkit developed toward the end of the story. We also have evidence not only of adaptation of the bodies to different environments, but also the changes in social life that are represented over here. You might think, well, how can paleoanthropologists possibly understand something about social life? Well, the archaeological evidence gives some very interesting clues. So, for example, we have evidence of butchery marks on animal bones going back to 2 million years, even now to 2.8 million years ago. And we have evidence of the transporting of rocks and of animals from different environments to these ancient places on the landscape, indicating that they were delaying their eating of food and bringing it back almost certainly to a social group. And that involves sharing of the food. We have evidence of the development and control of fire, the control of fire in the last 1 million years ago, especially excellently preserved hearths, fireplaces dating back to 800,000 years ago with evidence of cooking that was developing at that time. The slowing down of the pace of growth is very important to our humanness. The fact that infants and children take a long time to grow up, call upon the immense energies and time of nurturing that parents and grandparents and siblings and the kindness of others give to the process of growing up that we all had to experience. And then even the building of social networks can be determined by looking at rocks that come chemically. We can test that they came from many different directions and were brought to specific sites on the ancient landscape, first in Africa and then in other parts of the world. And so even the development of social networks, exchanges between groups, interactions between groups in ways that are somewhat similar in terms of the way in which we trade or nations trade today. We also have a panel about the development of brain size, and not only brain size, but also brain complexity. That the size of our brains is not only a matter of the number of nerve cells and neurons, but also the connectivity among the different nerve cells that is critical for the integration of information that we bring in to our heads, and also our ability ultimately to communicate as brain size became to communicate in more complex ways as brain size developed, especially over the last 800,000 years. We can see that the pace of brain size increase relative to the body increased right around the time when climates were highly fluctuating. But when you think about what our brains are good for, many different things, of course, but they're also our organ of flexibility and of complex social lives. And you can imagine how that would have been at a premium during a time when the risks and uncertainties of environmental change were very much highlighted and becoming more and more exaggerated over time. On the back side of this particular panel, we can also see the development of symbolic capabilities. All sorts of organisms, of course, communicate with one another and communicate within their social groups, and they're very sophisticated in doing that. But humans communicate in very specific ways that add on to that. And something that we find in the archaeological record is beginning in this is from our excavations, the Smithsonian excavations in Kenya, the organizing and bringing together of pigments, red pigment, orange pigment, black pigment, to these archaeological sites, where we also see the beginning of stone tool innovation and also of trading of very valuable kinds of rocks. And this particular panel just traces over time the development of ornamentation and jewelry, shell beads, for example, the recording of information that all of this develops during the period of our when Homo sapiens, our species, has been on Earth, and also the matter of the taking of that pigment ultimately and creating just astonishing, absolutely astonishing paintings and carving of figurines. And what we see then in this series of steps over time in this particular aspect of human symbolic communication is the emergence of our imaginations and of our creative lives. And that, I think, is one of the most important aspects that comes from our understanding of what it means to be human in this area of scientific discovery. Let's go over here now for a brief point. And what we see here, I call this the wall of skulls, but we have, again, another 6 million year timeline from 6 million years all the way across to today. And this is just a very small selection of the skulls of the diversity of species that we talked about earlier. There have been actually more than 6,000 fossil individuals that have been recovered from in the human fossil record over this 6 million year time. That's actually a pretty good fossil record, quite a rich fossil record for a primate of our size when you compare ourselves with the fossil records of other organisms. And of course, in addition to that, we have tens of thousands of archaeological sites that also show that early humans were on the landscape making their technology. And the stone tools, of course, are far less easily destroyed than the fossilized bones that were once laying out on the landscape before they were buried over and becoming fossilized. Now, of this particular group, there are two of my favorites that I like to think about. As this one here had about 1.8 million years ago on this timeline. And you can see that this is, we call them the old timer. It's a skull that comes from 5 different skulls that have been found from a site called Dmanisi. Dmanisi is in the Republic of Georgia. And this particular skull is interesting. Belonged to a male. We know this because we have the rest of the skeleton, or parts of the skeleton, including the pelvis, that allows us to indicate, to show that based on the breadth or narrowness of the pelvis, that this individual was a male. And this particular individual, this male, had basically no teeth. No teeth, and the amount of resorption of the bone, the basically dissolving of the bone due to no longer being able to chew, is the kind of receding of the gum line and of the bone that dentists will tell you takes about 5 to 7 years, 5 to 7 years to take place. And so this individual, this, again, old timer from Dmanisi, was able to survive so long ago for a good number of years without even the ability to chew. Well, what does that lead to? What kinds of questions does that pose? How was this person taken care of? Who was taking care of them? Members of his social group, almost certainly. But it does suggest that maybe there was a sense of responsibility in caring for individuals that goes so far back in our evolutionary history. Much later in time, another skull that's kind of interesting to contemplate is from the group known as Neanderthals. And there's a skull here from a cave in Iraq called Shanidar. This is the first Neanderthal that was found in Shanidar cave, dating back to about 50,000 years before the present. So much later in time from the first individual we looked at. This particular individual had damage that can be shown in x-rays to the left side of the skull, toward the front of the skull, and it apparently damaged the brain on that side of the skull. Okay, and the left side of the brain innervates, that is, it controls the nerves and the development of the right side of the body. So what we find is that when we look at the rest of the skeleton, that the entire right side of the body is withered. It did not develop in the way that would be expected in an adult. This individual probably had a great deal of difficulty, and perhaps an inability to move. And yet this particular individual, even though the trauma occurred probably around the age of 8 to 9 years of age, based on the development of the body, that this individual, based on looking at the microscopic tissues of the fossilized bones in the skeleton, this individual lived to about 45 to 55 years of age. So decades of being cared for by the social group. And so I think this sense of social responsibility and caring deep in our evolutionary history, including in species that were contemporaneous with us, but not us, goes back and comes from the study of the fossil record of our origin. And so let's finish up then, I think, by going on to the backside of this panel here. And as we bounce around, and really the question that we finish with on this particular panel is our own species and its own history through time. And what we find is that Homo sapiens, fossils of Homo sapiens, first developed in Africa about 300,000 years ago, and that most of our own species' evolutionary history has been in Africa. And it was really about 70,000 years ago that our species began to spread not only within Africa further, but also to other parts of Europe and Asia, and eventually to the variety of continents where our species lives. Well, you see that during this period of human evolutionary, of Homo sapiens history, that there are a number of other species, as we talked about, that went extinct. But our own species was in danger and lived at a very small population size, an unexpectedly small population size, but then was able to recover. And of course, now we're 8 billion plus people all over the planet. Matters of, as we go through time, of domestication and the development of agriculture came much later in time. The development of cities even later. The importance of infectious diseases later in time as people became more densely concentrated on the landscape. And then, of course, we have matters about how humans have changed the world in so many ways. And I think on this final panel, we see a lot to think about with regard to the future of humanity. And so I hope you've enjoyed this brief tour of the exhibit Exploring Human Origins. And we hope you have a chance to visit it either here at St. Paul School of Theology until the middle of May, or perhaps in other parts of the country. Thank you very much.